So we just talked in the last lecture about the role of perceptions. We sometimes have a tendency to misperceive things or perceive things in error. And this is what could be happening when we are having negative thoughts. We are misperceiving situations and possibly not fully taking certain pieces of information into account when we form our conclusion. So now let's shift the discussion a bit to talk about negative thinking. When I use the term negative thinking, I'm talking about the thoughts that interfere with you performing an action that's important to you and affect your emotions in a negative way. The thoughts themselves may be a conclusion that's formed based on a misperception of information in a certain situation. And in turn, your negative thoughts will convince you that certain actions are not worth taking. Your thoughts can be negative about other people as they relate to you taking action, or your thoughts can be negative about the future or outcome of the actions that you take. You may be aware of the thoughts, or they may be happening at a level that you're not aware of, or, the unconscious or deep-seated thoughts. Negative thoughts are more directly connected to deep-seated beliefs and form our core beliefs about ourselves, the world, and the future. Either way, you're not performing the action you feel you need to or that you would like to. You can be sure that you're being affected in some way by negative thinking when you're not doing the things that you believe you need to do in order to achieve your goal. So now that we've defined negative thinking, let's take a look at where it comes from and why we have negative thinking in the first place. Now, I'm bringing this up because I imagine that most people have the belief that if they can better understand where their negative thinking comes from, that they can eliminate it altogether. Now, I understand this logic, but unfortunately, it doesn't always hold up to be true. I mean, I guess it would be true if we were robots, right? We can control every aspect of our lives that influences our thoughts and our emotions. But the truth is, we're human beings with emotions, and we're not always rational in how we think about things. We will always be vulnerable to misperceiving situations and people, and as a result of that, we'll experience some forms of negative thinking. The reason that knowing where your negative thinking comes from is important is very similar to a robot. We tend to think about things in patterns very similarly across situations. So this means that when you misperceive one situation, there's a great chance that you do this a lot of the time in other situations in the exact same way. When you recognize the patterns, you can move more quickly to overcome the cycle of negative thinking using the process that we'll talk about later in the lecture, systematically to address those issues. You'll realize the types of situations where you're most vulnerable and have a go-to strategy for dealing with them. Sound good? All right. So here's where negative thinking comes from. Our patterns of negative thinking are the result of our life's experiences, what we've seen other people do, what we've heard other people say, and what we've experienced for ourselves. Our patterns of thinking become crystallized over time, and we automatically think about things the way we always have. So I'll give you the best example I can think of, using myself as an example. Whenever I am trying to do something that I've never done before, no matter how big or how small, my first thought is, I don't know how to do this, and I'm probably going to be terrible at it. And this thinking comes from years of hearing people say things like, you should just stick to what you know, stick to what you're good at. And if you do that, you can almost guarantee that you'll be successful. Okay, so let's break that down for a second and see if there are other meanings here with that statement. One that comes to mind is the idea that I've accepted as truth for a very long time. And it's when people say, stick to what you know, you can almost guarantee your success. It could also mean that if you do something different, you won't be successful because it's not something that you know. So all these years, I've been listening to what other people say and accepted this belief as true. And this belief has made my fear of doing new things greater and slowed me down whenever an opportunity presented itself to do something new. And it wasn't until I was able to realize how much I believed this that there was another way of thinking about approaching new situations. Now I realize that my own negative thinking about how I do when I have to do something I've never done before was developed over time from my own experience, what other people said, and what they had done. And it formed in me a strong belief that doing new things would lead to failure. And as a result of that, I became afraid to take these new opportunities. And now that I know this, I'm able to better apprehend those thoughts and not let them get in the way of me doing something new. Think about it. If I kept listening to this belief, I wouldn't have learned how to drive, how to ride a bike, or learn anything, you name it. I also came to realize a better way of thinking about this. I accepted that we are born not knowing anything at all. And if we work at something, we can eventually get good enough at whatever we're working on. So I had to adopt this new way of thinking and apply it whenever I get scared about doing something new. I intentionally remind myself, hey, of course you haven't done this before. You may not be very good at it at first, but if you apply yourself and keep working on your skill set, then you will get better at it. So that's my example. Now let's do a short recap. We said that negative thinking can be defined as the thoughts that interfere with you performing an action that's important to you and affects your emotions in a negative way. We also said that negative thinking is the result of what we've learned from others, what we've seen in others, and experienced ourselves. It forms how we think about ourselves, the world, and our future. I also mentioned that it's not enough to simply know where your negative thinking comes from, because it won't prevent you from having negative thoughts. What is important is that you understand your patterns of negative thinking so that you can be more systematic and effective in using the strategy we'll discuss later for dealing with your negative thinking. Without knowing exactly what our negative thoughts are, where they come from, and how they affect us, we will forever be held hostage to their harmful effects. So now that you have some new information, let's take a short quiz about the material that you just covered. I won't give you any help this time because you probably now have a sense of what the questions might be. So good luck. And if you need to review this lecture again, feel free to do so before moving on to the quiz.